So in 2014, there was this janitor in Vermont. He swept floors at a JCPenney, and when he died, he left behind an $8 million fortune.
Which is just, I mean, it's staggering to even think about.
Right. It's completely wild. And then you contrast that with a guy just 4 years earlier, a Harvard-educated Merrill Lynch executive who stood before a bankruptcy judge with absolutely nothing. Zero.
Yeah.
So today, for our deep dive, we're really asking, the most uncomfortable question in finance. Like, how did the janitor completely destroy the genius?
It's a question that really, it challenges the very foundation of how we're taught to think about success, I think.
Exactly.
Because we usually assume that, complex fields require profound technical intelligence. Like if you want a better bridge built, you hire a smarter engineer. That's just how it works.
Right. You want the person with the most degrees.
Exactly. But personal finance operates on an entirely different axis. It really does.
It's so counterintuitive. And, that contrast between Richard Fiscone, the Harvard MBA, the Merrill Lynch executive, and Ronald Reed, the rural Vermont janitor, is just the perfect lens for what we're unpacking today.
It really is the ultimate case study.
Because Fiscone he was incredibly successful on paper. He made those 40 under 40 lists. He retired early to be a philanthropist. He totally understood the complex machinery of global markets.
Oh, he knew all the math. He had the highest technical intelligence you could ask for.
Right. He had it all, right up until the 2008 financial crisis hit. And his massively leveraged lifestyle, which, by the way, included an 18,000 square foot mansion with a $90,000 monthly maintenance bill.
$90,000 a month just to keep the lights on and the grass cut.
It's insane. And it just evaporated. It was foreclosed on. He literally had to declare to a judge that he had zero income.
And then, you look at Ronald Reed, a man who was, I think he was the first in his family to even graduate high school.
Yeah, he hitchhiked to campus.
Right, he hitchhiked. He fixed cars for 25 years. He swept floors for 17 years. And he lived in the exact same $12,000 two-bedroom house his entire adult life.
Chopped his own firewood for fun.
Exactly, just a very quiet, simple life. Yet he dies with $8 million, leaving most of it to his local hospital and the local library.
And he didn't win the lottery.
Oh.
He didn't inherit some secret trust fund.
Not at all. He just, he executed a handful of basic financial habits, and he let time do all the heavy lifting.
Which I think fundamentally proves that managing money isn't a hard science. It's really a soft skill.
Definitely.
Because, you would never, ever see a janitor perform a better open-heart surgery than a Harvard-trained surgeon.
No, that would be terrifying.
Right. That just doesn't happen in a purely technical field.
Right.
But in investing, it happens constantly. Emotional control consistently beats technical intelligence when it comes to building personal wealth.
It's the ultimate equalizer.
So for you listening, whether you're trying to figure out how to allocate a massive corporate bonus or you're just trying to get your household budget to stop bleeding cash every month, the mission of this deep dive is to isolate those soft skills.
We really want to identify the key habits for long-term financial success.
Yes, exactly. We're going to extract actionable tips for everyday personal money management and basically figure out how to stop making decisions like the executive and start building lasting financial security like the janitor.
And to build those habits, we first have to confront a psychological barrier that trips almost everyone up.
Okay, what's that?
We have to accept a reality that feels completely counterintuitive when you look around at the world today. And that reality is no one is actually crazy.
I have to admit, that premise completely threw me when I first read the source material.
It throws a lot of people.
Because, when I see someone dropping $90,000 a month just to keep the lights on in an 11-bathroom house, my immediate instinctual reaction is, that person has lost their mind. That is objectively crazy.
Oh, it looks entirely crazy from the outside. But the underlying mechanics of human belief are just vastly more complicated than that.
How so?
Well, every single person alive is raised in a different generation. They're raised under different economic conditions by parents with wildly different attitudes toward money.
Right.
So you have people who came of age during massive inflationary periods in the 70s versus those who only know the zero interest rate environments of the 2010s.
Which completely changes how you view risk.
Exactly. Because of that, everyone learns completely different lessons about how the world functions. And the data on this is incredibly humbling.
Yeah.
A person's individual direct experience makes up perhaps 0.000000000000001% of what has actually happened in the global economy.
It's basically a rounding error. in the grand scheme of human history.
A microscopic fraction of reality. Yet that tiny, tiny sliver of lived experience dictates roughly 80% of how that person thinks the entire world works.
Wow. So what we experience firsthand is just deeply, almost biologically more compelling to us than anything we could ever read in a textbook or, analyze on a spreadsheet.
Without a doubt.
There's actually a historical example of this from the sources that illustrates the divide perfectly. It's John F. Kennedy.
Oh, the 1960 election story.
Yeah, exactly. During the 1960 presidential election, he was asked to recall his experiences of the Great Depression. Now, the Depression was the defining trauma of an entire generation, right? It scarred the American psyche for decades.
It changed how everyone handled money.
Right. But Kennedy openly admitted he had absolutely no firsthand knowledge of it.
Because his family's wealth completely insulated him. I mean, they actually grew wealthier during the 1930s.
Exactly. He said his family had bigger houses, they had more servants. He said the only visible sign of the Depression he saw as a kid was his father hiring extra gardeners just to give local men jobs so their families could eat.
Wow.
He literally stated that he didn't really learn about the Great Depression until he was studying it at Harvard.
So just contrast that experience with a factory worker who lost his job, lost his home, lost his dignity during that exact same decade.
It's two different worlds.
Right. If you put that factory worker and John F. Kennedy in a room in 1960 and ask them to agree on a strategy for risk management or corporate tax policy, they wouldn't just disagree on the math.
They'd be speaking completely different psychological languages.
Exactly. They are anchored to entirely different realities. And understanding this is one of the key habits for long-term financial success. You have to realize everyone has a different anchor.
And it's not just a historical anecdote, right? There is actual empirical data backing this up. I was looking at this massive study from the National Bureau of Economic Research.
By Ulrich Malmendier and Stefan Nuckel.
Yes. They dug through 50 years of the Survey of Consumer Finances, which is essentially the gold standard for tracking what everyday Americans do with their money over time.
And the findings of that study completely upend the traditional view of financial education.
It really does. Because what shocked me was that an individual investor's willingness to take financial risks has almost nothing to do with their intelligence.
Right.
It has nothing to do with their education level or even their current income. It is almost entirely dependent on the dumb luck of what the economy was doing when they were young adults.
It's all about what the market did when you were in your 20s and 30s.
Right. If you grew up in the 1970s when inflation was just destroying purchasing power, you avoided bonds later in life. You saw them as wealth incinerators.
Yeah, because they literally were incinerating your money at that time.
But if you grew up in a later era where inflation was dead and interest rates were steadily falling, bonds looked like a brilliant, safe, wealth-generating machine.
And neither group is stupid. I mean, Bill Gross, the legendary bond manager, openly acknowledged that his entire wildly successful career coincided with a generational collapse in interest rates. His lived reality validated a strategy that would have ruined his father's generation.
So it's all context.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you realize this, you start to see that people aren't acting irrationally. They are just heavily weighting the lessons of their own specific lives force them to learn.
Okay, I understand the theory, but let me challenge that for a second. Let's look at a behavior that is deeply self-destructive.
Okay, let's hear it.
In the U.S., the lowest income households spend an average of over $400 a year on lottery tickets.
Yep, the lottery paradox.
Now, statistically, we know a huge percentage of those exact same households cannot come up with $400 for an emergency. A blown tire or a minor medical bill could send them into an absolute debt spiral.
Which is a terrifying reality for a lot of people.
Exactly. Yet they are taking that exact amount of capital and literally burning it on mathematically impossible odds. I'm sorry, but understanding their background doesn't make that a smart or even a sane financial decision.
This is exactly where the distinction between rationalizing a behavior and condoning a behavior becomes really, really vital.
Okay.
Is buying a lottery ticket when you are functionally broke a mathematically sound strategy? Absolutely not. It is a terrible use of capital. But we have to step out of the spreadsheet and into their psychology. We have to look at the environment shaping the decision.
All right, let's unpack this. Walk me through the mindset.
Imagine you're living paycheck to paycheck. Perhaps you're working a minimum wage job with zero upward mobility.
Right.
Saving even $20 a week feels completely futile because the cost of living is just continually outpacing your income. The traditional markers of the American dream, buying a home in a safe neighborhood, sending your kids to college, taking a vacation that doesn't involve enormous stress, they just feel entirely out of reach.
It's all completely locked away from you.
Right. For a lot of these individuals, the systemic reality is that hard work alone is just not bridging the gap between poverty and comfort.
So the traditional advice of just save 10% of your income feels insulting.
Very insulting.
Because 10% of nothing is nothing, and it still doesn't buy the house.
Precisely. So when they buy a lottery ticket, they aren't sitting down and calculating the statistical probability of a jackpot.
They know the math is bad.
They absolutely know. They are paying $2 to purchase a very specific feeling. They are buying hope.
Wow.
For the few days before that drawing, they have a tangible, socially acceptable dream of escaping their reality. It is the one time in their lives they can hold a piece of paper that represents a chance to get the good stuff that wealthier people take for granted.
So they aren't buying math. They're buying an emotional release valve.
Yes. And if you already have an emergency fund, if you have a 401k and a stable career trajectory, you are already living the dream that the lottery ticket represents.
That makes so much sense.
You don't need to buy a scratch-off to feel hope about your future because your reality already provides it. That is why the behavior looks crazy to the middle and upper class.
We just don't have the same emotional deficit that needs filling.
Exactly. The key takeaway for our own everyday money management is this. We are incredibly quick to judge other people's financial failures as crazy, while we conveniently justify our own poor decisions as contextual.
Because we have the full context of our own lives. When we make a mistake, we know we were stressed or we were tired or we were given bad advice.
Right.
But when someone else makes a mistake, we just assume they lack discipline.
Right.
We judge their character instead of their context.
Exactly. And once you recognize that everyone is just making decisions that make sense to them in that specific moment based on their unique worldview, you can drop the judgment.
Which is huge for exploring the soft skills required for smarter, long-term financial decision-making.
It is. More importantly, it forces you to become brutally analytical about your own blind spots. You start asking yourself, what financial beliefs am I holding on to simply because of the decade I happen to be born in?
That is such a powerful pivot for personal finance. Because if our personal experiences blind us to objective reality, that blindness is probably most dangerous when we look at how other people display their money.
Oh, absolutely.
Which brings us perfectly to the man-in-the-car paradox and the deeply deceptive, invisible nature of true wealth.
This might be the most pervasive illusion in modern consumer capitalism, honestly. We constantly evaluate how well our peers are doing financially based entirely on what we can see.
Right.
And we do this out of necessity because we simply don't have access to their bank statements or their brokerage accounts. We can't see their debt.
We judge their success by the external markers.
Yeah.
The zip code they live in, the brand of clothes they wear, the Instagram photos of their trips to the Amalfi Coast. But there's this incredible anecdote about the singer Rihanna from the sources that just shatters this illusion.
Oh, the lawsuit. Yeah.
Yeah. A few years ago, she nearly went bankrupt. She had blown through millions and millions of dollars, and she ended up suing her financial advisor for mismanagement.
Right.
And the advisor's response in court was just absolutely brutal, but it contained this profound truth. He basically asked the judge, was it really necessary to explicitly tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
It reads like a joke, but it highlights a massive foundational flaw in human logic.
It really does.
When most people say, I want to be a millionaire, what they're actually saying is, I want to spend $1 million. And spending $1 million is literally the mathematical opposite of being a millionaire.
That semantic difference is what ruins people. The difference between being rich and being wealthy. Let's break down those definitions because getting this wrong dictates so many bad everyday money decisions.
It is a critical distinction, and it's one of those soft skills required for smarter long-term financial decision-making. Rich is simply a measure of current income. It is loud, and it is highly visible.
So flashy.
Very flashy. If you see someone driving a $150,000 sports car, they're almost certainly rich.
Right.
Even if they bought that car with crushing high-interest debt, they still need a substantial current income just to afford the monthly payments and the insurance. Rich people often go out of their way to ensure, they are rich. It is an external performance.
But wealth is fundamentally different.
Completely.
Wealth is hidden. It is income that has not been spent. It is the luxury car that was never purchased. It's the first-class upgrade that was declined. Wealth consists of financial assets that haven't yet been converted into tangible stuff.
Its true value lies entirely in the invisible. Wealth offers you options. It offers flexibility. It offers the growth required to buy substantially more stuff later if you choose to.
I was thinking about this through the lens of physics because it maps so perfectly.
Ooh, I like this. Go on.
Being rich is kinetic energy. It's moving, it's flashy, it's interacting with the environment. You can physically see the kinetic energy of a Ferrari accelerating down the avenue.
Right.
But wealth is potential energy. That's the massive boulder sitting quietly at the very top of the hill. It's not making any noise. It's not doing anything visible to the naked eye. But it contains an enormous amount of stored power. It holds the option to roll down the hill whenever you decide the time is right.
That is a brilliant analogy. I mean, the tragedy of everyday personal finance is that because wealth is potential energy, because it is inherently invisible, it is incredibly difficult to learn from.
Right.
As humans, we learn best by imitation. We watch what successful people do and we copy them. But how do you imitate a behavior you cannot see?
You can't. Think about Ronald Reed, our janitor from the introduction. He's hailed as a financial genius now that he is dead and his will has become public record. But while he was alive, going to work at JCPenney every day in his old frayed coat, absolutely no one was trying to imitate his financial habits because his $8 million in blue chip stocks was entirely hidden. No one could see the boulder at the top of the hill.
Which leads directly into the man-in-the-car paradox.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Think about what happens when you are walking down the street and you see someone pull up to a stoplight in a stunning, roaring Ferrari. You almost never look at the driver and think, wow, the person behind the wheel is so cool, I deeply admire them.
Never.
Instead, you look at the machine and you imagine yourself in the driver's seat.
Yes. You project your own ego onto the object. The actual driver is just an anonymous prop in your own fantasy.
This is the ultimate psychological trap of luxury goods. The person buys the Ferrari because they are seeking respect and admiration from society. They believe the car acts as a megaphone that shouts, I have made it, I am successful, you should respect me.
But they completely fail to realize that the onlookers are bypassing the owner entirely.
Exactly. The onlookers are just using the car to fuel their own desire to be respected and admired.
So the driver spends an absolute fortune trying to be admired, but the pedestrians ignore the driver and just admire the car, wishing they were the ones being admired. It's a complete disconnect.
It's a transaction that fails to deliver the emotional return it promised.
And the actionable tip here for you listening is profound.
Huh.
If your goal is to gain genuine respect and admiration from your peers, using money to buy fancy things is a highly inefficient strategy.
Very inefficient. Humility, kindness, empathy, and competence will consistently bring you more respect than horsepower or designer labels ever will.
Okay, so true wealth is the money you do not spend. It's the invisible potential energy. But if we all intellectually understand that, why is it so incredibly hard for smart people to stop spending?
That is the million-dollar question.
It feels like there is a relentless psychological gravity constantly pulling us to convert that potential energy into kinetic energy just to show off. And that gravity leads us straight into the danger of never enough and the massive risk of playing the wrong game.
This is where we transition from simply misunderstanding the illusions of wealth to observing the active destruction of it.
Right.
And to understand the everyday risks we face with our own budgets, we have to look at extreme, catastrophic, cautionary tales.
Let's talk about Rajat Gupta and Bernie Madoff, because these were not people who were struggling to pay their mortgages. They had reached the absolute pinnacle of wealth, prestige, and institutional power.
The very top.
Rajat Gupta was the CEO of McKinsey, arguably the most prestigious consulting firm on earth. He sat on the board of Goldman Sachs. He was a trusted advisor to billionaires and politicians.
And Bernie Madoff was a highly respected pioneer in electronic trading long before his Ponzi scheme was exposed.
Right. They had total financial freedom, generational wealth, and yet they both resorted to blatant criminality, insider trading, and massive fraud, and threw it all away in spectacular fashion. Why do you risk $100 million in your freedom when you already have everything?
Because they lacked the most difficult financial skill of all, which is arguably the most important life skill.
Wow.
getting the goalpost to stop moving.
The goalpost just keeps shifting.
Exactly. For Gupta and Madoff, there was no absolute amount of money that would ever satisfy them because their satisfaction was entirely relative to what the people around them had.
We are deeply wired for social comparison.
Yet we are. But in the modern economy, the ceiling of social comparison is astronomically high.
It's a ladder with no top rung. Think about it.
Yeah.
If you are a rookie professional baseball player making $500,000 a year, you feel incredibly rich compared to your friends from high school.
Oh, you feel like a king.
But then you walk into the locker room and sit next to Mike Trout, who is making $36 million a year. Suddenly you feel poor. But then Mike Trout goes to a charity gala and talks to a hedge fund manager who took home $340 million that year. The hedge fund manager feels amazing until he reads an article about Warren Buffett making $3.5 billion in a single year.
And Buffett looks at a tech founder whose net worth jumps $20 billion in a week. It literally never ends.
It is a battle that mathematically cannot be won. Which is why the advice from a veteran Las Vegas casino dealer from the sources is so applicable here.
Oh, I love this quote.
When someone asks this dealer, who watches people lose their life savings every single day, but the only way to actually win in a casino is, the dealer replied, the only way to win is to exit as soon as you enter.
That is chillingly accurate.
It really is.
It is exactly how the game of keeping up with other people's wealth works. You cannot win it by playing faster or taking more risk. You have to opt out of the game entirely.
You just have to walk away.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to independently define what enough is for your own life and then violently defend that boundary.
And we should clarify for the listener, enough doesn't mean settling for poverty or abandoning ambition.
Not at all. Enough is simply the realization that an insatiable, unexamined appetite for more will eventually push you to the point of profound regret.
It's knowing when to stop.
Think of it like eating a meal. The only way to truly know exactly how much food your stomach can hold is to eat until you are physically sick and vomit.
Right, which we don't do.
We don't do that because vomiting is painful and damaging. Yet in personal finance, people routinely push their risk tolerance and their lifestyle spending until they become financially sick, entirely because they haven't established their internal boundary of enough.
What really struck me about this concept is that this relentless desire for more isn't just an isolated individual problem. When millions of people do this simultaneously, it creates massive systemic financial bubbles that can wipe out an entire economy.
Absolutely.
Look at the dot-com bubble in the late 1990s. Specifically, the mania surrounding tech stocks like Yahoo in 1999. In hindsight, we look back at those valuations and we say, everyone lost their minds. It was totally irrational. People were crazy. But if we go back to our first rule, no one is crazy, we have to find a better explanation.
And the better explanation is a crucial paradigm shift for everyday investors. We tend to blame financial bubbles on irrational optimism or mass greed.
Right, just pure hysteria.
But a far more accurate explanation is that everyday investors began taking their financial cues from people who were playing a completely different game than they were.
Break that down for me. How does playing a different game fundamentally alter the price of an asset and cause a bubble?
Let's do a thought experiment. How much should you pay for one share of a major tech company today?
Okay.
The actual correct answer depends entirely on who you are and what your timeline is. If you are a long-term investor with a 30-year horizon saving for retirement, you are going to analyze discounted cash flows, market share, and long-term industry trends.
Right, you care about the fundamental health of the business over decades. You want to know what the company will be producing in the year 2050.
Exactly. But now imagine you are a short-term day trader. The fundamental value of that company over the next 30 years is utterly and completely irrelevant to you.
You don't care at all.
You only care if the stock price is going to move up between 10:00 a.m. and 2:00 p.m. this afternoon.
Because you are going to sell it before the market closes.
Precisely. If a stock has massive momentum and is surging upwards, it makes complete rational sense for a day trader to buy it at an absurdly high valuation, because their entire strategy is just to sell it to someone else for slightly more money in 2 hours.
It's just a game of hot potato.
Yes. During the dot-com bubble, momentum was everywhere. It attracted short-term traders in a very reasonable, logical way for their specific game.
So the disaster didn't happen because day traders were acting irrationally. The disaster happened when regular people, the long-term investors saving for their kids' college funds, saw the day traders making a killing and started taking their cues from them.
Yes. The long-term investor sees the day trader doubling their money in a week and thinks, I should buy this incredibly overvalued internet stock too.
But they are applying a short-term trading tactic to a long-term retirement strategy.
It is the equivalent of trying to win a marathon by sprinting the first 100 yards just because you watched a sprinter do it.
It guarantees exhaustion and failure. A long-term investor operates in a world governed by fundamentals and compounding. A short-term trader operates in a world governed by psychology and momentum. If you don't explicitly know what game you are playing, you will inevitably adopt the rules of a game that will ruin you.
So, when a listener turns on a financial news network and sees a pundit screaming, you must buy this stock right now,
Yeah.
they have to apply a critical filter.
They have to ask, who is this advice for?
Exactly. That pundit does not know who you are. They don't know if you are a 22-year-old trading aggressively for fun, a 65-year-old widow on a fixed income, or a hedge fund manager trying to hit a quarterly benchmark.
Which means taking generalized financial advice without knowing your own specific game is incredibly dangerous. You have to define your timeline, define your goals, and ruthlessly ignore the behavior of people who are playing a different game, no matter how much money they seem to be making in the short term.
That is the essence of emotional control, and knowing your game is what helps you accumulate money. But as financial history shows us repeatedly, getting money and keeping that money require two entirely different, almost contradictory skill sets.
Which brings us to the mechanics of financial survival. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
A huge distinction.
To understand this, we need to look at another incredible historical parallel from 1929, the stories of Jesse Livermore and Abraham Jermansky.
Two titans of the Roaring '20s.
Jesse Livermore is a legend on Wall Street. He was one of the greatest stock market traders in history. By the time he was 30 years old in the early 1900s, he was worth the inflation-adjusted equivalent of $100 million. He was an absolute master at getting wealthy.
And his contemporary, Abraham Jermansky, was a wildly successful multimillionaire real estate developer during the Roaring '20s. Another man who was exceptional at acquiring vast sums of wealth and navigating complex deals.
But then the great crash of 1929 hits. The market completely implodes. And both of these brilliant men lose absolutely everything.
Everything.
Jermansky vanished during the chaos and was presumed to have taken his own life. Livermore actually survived the initial crash. He brilliantly shorted the market and became one of the richest men in the world for a brief moment.
But he couldn't hold on to it.
Right. Over the next 4 years, he lost every single penny in a series of increasingly risky, leveraged bets. He eventually took his own life as well. Two absolute masters of getting wealthy who completely failed at staying wealthy.
Because they didn't realize that the skills required for the two phases are entirely different. Getting money requires risk-taking. It requires boundless optimism, putting yourself out there and swinging for the fences. You have to believe you can beat the odds.
But keeping money.
Keeping money requires the exact opposite. It requires frugality. It requires a healthy, constant dose of paranoia. And, most importantly, it requires a humbling acceptance that your past success was at least partly due to luck, which means you cannot rely on it to repeat itself indefinitely. You can't just keep doubling down.
If you think about the mechanics of that, it makes perfect sense. To survive, you have to be able to endure the down periods.
Yeah.
Which leads to this fascinating story about Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger.
The ultimate survivors.
We all know them as the ultimate examples of staying wealthy. But back in the 1970s, it wasn't just a duo, it was a trio. There was a third guy named Rick Guerin.
Yes, Buffett, Munger, and Guerin. They made investments together, they interviewed managers together, they were all brilliant at identifying undervalued companies. But most people today have never heard of Rick Guerin.
Because during the brutal stock market downturn in 1973 and 1974, when the market dropped almost 70% in 2 years, Rick Guerin got wiped out.
Completely wiped out.
And he got wiped out because he used margin loans, he used leverage.
Leverage is the ultimate double-edged sword. When you borrow money to invest, it amplifies your gains on the way up, but it massively accelerates your destruction on the way down.
It forces your hand.
Yes, because Guerin was heavily levered. When the market tanked, he received margin calls. The banks demanded their money back immediately. He was forced to sell his shares in Berkshire Hathaway to Warren Buffett for under $40 apiece at the exact bottom of the market, just to avoid total bankruptcy.
Buffett and Munger survived the exact same 70% drop because they didn't use debt. They had built a portfolio designed for endurance. Guerin was equally skilled at the intellectual part of getting wealthy, but he lacked the paranoia required to survive the storm.
He didn't have the emotional control to stay wealthy.
And the reason survival is the single most important metric in finance comes down to a mathematical reality that the human brain is just biologically ill-equipped to understand. Compounding.
Compounding is where the magic happens, but it is deeply counterintuitive. Human evolution trained us to think linearly. If you see one lion on the savannah, it's dangerous. If you see two lions, it's twice as dangerous. Linear thinking kept us alive. But compounding is exponential, and exponential growth breaks our intuition.
If you want to see how badly our brains handle exponential growth, just look at the difference between adding and multiplying.
Okay, let's hear the math.
If I ask you to add the number 8 9 times, so 8 plus 8 plus 8, 9 times over, you can easily figure out that it's 72.
Simple enough.
But if I ask you to multiply 8 by itself 9 times, the number explodes to over 134 million.
Wow.
The gap between 72 and 134 million is the gap between how we think wealth grows and how it actually grows over decades.
And the critical secret to exponential growth is that the most massive, mind-bending gains only happen at the very end of the time horizon.
Right.
Warren Buffett's net worth is well over $100 billion. But what is truly shocking is that he acquired more than 95% of that wealth after his 65th birthday.
That is wild. He didn't just have high returns, he had endurance. He survived long enough for the exponential math to run wild in his late stages.
Exactly. His secret wasn't just picking the right stocks. His secret was being a consistently good investor for 3/4 of a century without ever getting wiped out. Charlie Munger famously said that the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily.
Okay, but let's talk about the actionable side of this. How do you ensure you survive? How do you guarantee you won't be forced to interrupt the compounding process like Rick Guerin did?
This is where we get into some actionable tips for everyday personal money management.
Right, because the solution introduces a massive psychological dilemma for everyday investors. Holding cash.
Holding cash during a raging bull market is pure psychological agony.
It hurts.
It does. When the market is returning 15% a year and your cash is sitting in a bank account earning 1%, you feel like an idiot. The fear of missing out gnaws at you every single time you look at your portfolio.
You feel like you are actively losing money to inflation, and you feel like everyone else is getting rich while you sit on the sidelines. But what does that cash actually do for you? What is its true function?
Cash is the oxygen that guarantees survival. If you have enough cash set aside, you are never, ever forced to sell your stocks during a 70% market crash just to pay your mortgage or buy groceries.
It gives you a buffer.
Cash gives you the endurance to wait out the storm. It is the ultimate margin of safety. Your goal shouldn't be to maximize your returns at every possible moment. Your goal should be to make yourself financially unbreakable.
So to guarantee survival, you need a margin of safety. And the easiest, most reliable way to build that margin of safety isn't through some complex algorithmic trading strategy. It is through the simplest, most mundane financial habit of all.
Yes.
Which brings us to the ultimate soft skill, saving for no reason.
This concept might be the most empowering idea for anyone listening who feels overwhelmed by investing. We are constantly conditioned by the financial industry to believe that wealth is generated by securing massive salaries or achieving genius-level investment returns.
Right, the stuff we can't easily control.
Exactly. Both of those variables are largely outside of your direct control. Your savings rate, however, is almost entirely within your control.
And I absolutely love how the author defines savings here. He doesn't define it as a mathematical formula. He says that savings is simply the gap between your ego and your income.
It is a brilliant framing. Once you cover your basic biological and safety needs, food, shelter, a baseline level of comfort, almost all spending beyond that is driven by ego.
It's all just signaling.
It is spending money to signal to other people that you have money. It's extending your peacock feathers to attract attention or respect.
Right. And if you recognize that, you realize that the most powerful, immediate way to increase your savings isn't necessarily to work overtime or beg for a promotion.
No, it's to raise your own humility.
Yes. If you genuinely care less about what other people think of you, you will naturally desire less stuff. If you desire less stuff, you spend less. And if you spend less, your savings rate explodes.
And this leads to debunking one of the most firmly entrenched myths in personal finance. Every financial planner, every budgeting app tells you that you need to be saving for something specific.
You have a bucket for a house down payment, a bucket for a new car, A bucket for a vacation.
Goal-oriented saving. It feels incredibly logical,
It is logical, but only if you live in a perfectly predictable world.
which we don't.
Right. But our world is fundamentally chaotic. Saving for a specific goal is fine, but you must also save just for saving's sake. Unearmarked savings is a hedge against life's inevitable, terrifying ability to surprise the hell out of you at the worst possible moment.
This is one of the key habits for long-term financial success, just saving for no reason.
Let me push back on the mechanics of that, though. If I'm just piling up cash in a bank account for no specific reason, inflation is actively eroding its purchasing power every single year. Any spreadsheet will definitively prove that sitting on idle cash is mathematically bad money management. What is the actual return on investment of that unearmarked money?
If you only look at the math, you are right. But life is not lived on a spreadsheet. Psychologically and practically, the return on investment of that idle cash is completely incalculable
How so?
because it provides a hidden return that numbers can't capture. It gives you absolute control over your time.
And time control is the ultimate currency. There's some incredible research on this from a pioneering psychologist named Angus Campbell back in 1981.
Yes, Campbell was far ahead of his time. Back then, psychology was almost entirely focused on pathology, what made people depressed, anxious, or schizophrenic. Campbell wanted to flip the script. He wanted to know what actually made people feel a profound sense of well-being and happiness.
He studied demographics, income, geography, and education.
And what he found completely disrupted the narrative. He found that plenty of wealthy, highly educated people living in nice areas were absolutely miserable, but he isolated one massive universal predictor of positive well-being.
He concluded that having a strong sense of controlling one's own life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any other objective condition in life.
It matters more than the size of your salary.
More than the square footage of your house.
And more than the prestige of your job title. The ability to wake up every morning and say, I can do whatever I want today, is the highest possible dividend that money can pay.
Which brings up the story of Garrick Sivers from the sources. Sivers is a highly successful entrepreneur now, but when he was 22 years old, he had a grueling day job in Manhattan, making just $20,000 a year. Barely above minimum wage.
Living in one of the most expensive cities on earth.
Right. But he intentionally lived on only $1,000 a month. He never ate at restaurants, never took a taxi, lived incredibly frugally. And over 2 years of grinding, he managed to save up $12,000.
Now, in the grand scheme of Manhattan real estate, $12,000 is nothing. But what did that specific $12,000 buy him?
It bought him his freedom.
Oh.
It bought him the ability to walk into his boss's office, quit his job, and become a full-time musician. He knew he could hustle and get enough small gigs to cover his basic living expenses, but that cash buffer meant he wasn't desperate.
He wasn't trapped.
He later said he felt like a completely free man at age 22, all because of a tiny pile of savings that gave him absolute, unquestioned control over his time.
That is the ultimate flex of everyday savings. Having a 6-month emergency fund means you are no longer terrified of your boss because you know you won't be financially ruined if you get laid off or if you decide the toxic culture isn't worth it anymore.
It gives you the flexibility to decline a mediocre job offer and wait for a great one.
In our modern economy, where specific technical skills can become obsolete overnight due to AI or automation, having the financial flexibility to pause, retrain, and pivot is the single greatest competitive advantage you can possess.
So we're prioritizing flexibility over perfect mathematical optimization. And this brings us to a massive fundamental conflict between what the textbooks say we should do and what our human brains can actually handle in the real world.
We need to talk about designing a financial plan that is reasonable rather than rational.
And to illustrate why being perfectly rational is dangerous, the sources highlight one of the most bizarre, disturbing medical stories I have ever heard, the story of Dr. Julius Wagner-Jauregg.
It is a harrowing story, but it perfectly encapsulates the difference between what works on paper and what works in reality.
Yeah.
Wagner-Jauregg was a 19th century psychiatrist. During his era, syphilis was a horrific, rampant, and universally fatal disease. There was no cure, and the late stages involved terrifying neurological decline.
Just a brutal way to go.
But Wagner-Jauregg noticed a strange pattern in his asylum. Occasionally, a syphilis patient would seem to recover if they coincidentally contracted another severe disease that caused a prolonged, massive fever.
Because the extremely high body temperature literally cooked the syphilis bacteria to death inside the patient.
Exactly. The heat destroyed the bacteria. So Wagner-Scharig did something that would get a doctor imprisoned for life today, but actually won him a Nobel Prize in 1927. He intentionally injected his terminal syphilis patients with strains of malaria.
It is absolutely horrifying to think about.
It is. Malaria causes brutal, cyclic, agonizing fevers. The malaria fever would cook and kill the syphilis bacteria, and then because they actually had treatments for malaria at the time, like quinine, he would cure the malaria.
Mathematically, scientifically, it is a perfectly rational treatment. The fever kills the bacteria. It solves the biological problem perfectly on paper. But as a universal medical treatment, it is deeply, profoundly unreasonable.
Why is it unreasonable? Because fevers hurt.
They are agonizing.
They cause unimaginable misery, chills, and physical agony. Patients do not go to a doctor to experience agonizing pain. They go to a doctor to stop hurting. So while it was technically a rational cure, it was not a reasonable one that any human being could willingly endure unless faced with absolute certain death.
And the parallel to personal finance is exact. You are not an Excel spreadsheet. You are a biological creature driven by hormones, fear, and fatigue.
Exactly.
Aiming to be coldly, perfectly rational with your money strategy will almost always lead to failure, because you will not be able to endure the emotional pain of executing that strategy during a crisis. Instead, aiming to be pretty reasonable is a strategy you can actually stick with long enough for compounding to work.
The contrast between two different financial minds proves this perfectly. First, consider Harry Markowitz. He is an absolute titan of finance. He won a Nobel Prize for creating modern portfolio theory, which mathematically defines the exact optimal trade-off between risk and return.
He literally wrote the formula for rational investing.
But when he was asked how he invested his own retirement money in the 1950s, he admitted he didn't use his own complex formulas. He just split his money 50-50 between stocks and bonds.
The guy who invented the complex math didn't even use it. Why?
Because he said he visualized his own future grief. He knew that if the stock market went way up and he wasn't in it, he would be miserable. And if the market crashed and he lost everything, he would be miserable.
So it was about his feelings, not the math.
His goal for his own money wasn't to rationally maximize his returns. His goal was to reasonably minimize his future regret so he could sleep at night.
He optimized for his own psychology. Now, contrast Markowitz with a study published by a team of Yale researchers. They wrote a paper arguing that young savers in their 20s should aggressively use 2-to-1 margin debt in their retirement accounts, basically borrowing $2 for every $1 they invest in the stock market.
And mathematically, over a 40-year time frame, the researchers proved that this leverage strategy leads to 90% more wealth at retirement. On a spreadsheet, it is the most highly rational strategy a young person could adopt.
But it is 100% unreasonable for a human being. Because if you use 2-to-1 margin, a 50% drop in the stock market completely wipes out your entire account. You go to zero.
And the researchers openly acknowledge that mathematical reality. But their model assumed that when the young investor gets wiped out and loses everything, they simply dust themselves off the very next morning, perfectly unfazed, borrow more money, and start the strategy over again with zero emotional baggage.
No normal human being can do that. If you watch your entire life savings vaporize in a single day, you're going to be hyperventilating in a paper bag, you're going to swear off the stock market forever, and you'll probably try to sue someone.
It's just human nature to panic.
It's like prescribing an absolutely perfect, biologically optimal crash diet where you only eat plain broccoli for a month. It's scientifically rational, but you'll be so miserable you'll quit on day 3 and binge eat 3 pizzas.
A slightly imperfect diet that you can reasonably stick with for 10 years will fundamentally beat the mathematically perfect diet that you abandon on Tuesday.
That is the essence of why reasonable beats rational. The technically perfect strategy is completely useless if you abandon it during a panic. There is a massive quantifiable advantage to choosing a strategy that keeps you in the game.
Look at the historical data for the U.S. stock market. The odds of making money over any random one-day period are roughly a coin flip, about 50%. But over any 20-year period in history, the odds of making money jump to 100%. Endurance is the only thing that puts the odds heavily in your favor.
But endurance is incredibly difficult. Not just because the market is volatile, but because we ourselves are volatile. Psychologists call this the end of history illusion. It's this massive blind spot we all share, where we vastly underestimate how much our own personalities, desires, and goals will change in the future.
It's a fascinating quirk of the human brain. We walk around with this ingrained illusion that the person we are today is the final, finished product. We can easily look back at who we were 10 years ago and cringe at our terrible fashion choices, our naive political beliefs, or our ridiculous career goals.
We clearly recognize our past capacity for change.
But for some inexplicable reason, we assume that from this exact moment forward, we will remain exactly the same forever.
This plays out disastrously in financial planning. You have an 18-year-old who decides they want to be a high-powered corporate lawyer, working 80 hours a week in a glass tower. They design their entire educational and financial plan around taking on massive student debt to achieve that singular goal.
But the 30-year-old version of that exact same person, who now has a toddler and a different worldview, might desperately want to work 30 hours a week from a quiet house in the suburbs.
The rigid plan built by the naive 18-year-old becomes an inescapable prison for the 30-year-old.
Because of this illusion, the actionable advice is to ruthlessly avoid extreme financial planning. Extreme frugality, where you deny yourself all joy and experiences just to save every single penny, or extreme workaholism, where you chase every dollar at the expense of your physical health and your family relationships. Both of these extremes massively increase the odds of severe future regret.
Because the person you inevitably become in 20 years will not value the extreme outcome you are currently sacrificing everything for.
Exactly. Aiming for balance, maintaining a moderate savings rate, enduring a moderate commute, ensuring you have moderate free time, gives you the foundational flexibility to adapt to your own internal changes without having to abandon your entire financial life and start from scratch.
Okay, so sticking with a reasonable, balanced plan sounds fantastic in a vacuum. It sounds easy, but it only sounds easy until the market starts melting down, the news anchors are screaming about an impending depression, and your lizard brain is screaming at you that you have to do something to stop the financial bleeding.
We have to talk about how to survive that panic.
This is the concept of paying the price and surviving pessimism.
Everything worthwhile in life has a price tag attached to it. If you walk into a dealership to buy a new car, and the sticker says $30,000, you instantly know you have three options. One, you can pay the $30,000. Two, you can decide that price is too high and go buy a cheaper used car. Or three, you can try to steal the new car.
And virtually everyone understands that trying to steal the car is a catastrophic idea because the consequences of getting caught and going to prison far outweigh the upside of getting a free car.
Right. It's obvious in the physical world. But in the world of investing, the price tag for long-term wealth isn't visible in dollars and cents. The price of investing success is paid in the currency of volatility, fear, doubt, uncertainty, and regret.
It's an emotional tax.
Yes. And because that psychological price tag isn't clearly written on a label, when the market drops 20% and your portfolio balance shrinks, it doesn't feel like you are paying a standard fee for a valuable service. It feels like you are paying a punitive fine for making a terrible mistake.
That distinction between a fee and a fine completely reframes the experience. When you get a parking fine, the lesson is clear. I did something wrong. I need to change my behavior so I don't get punished again. But paying an admission fee to get into a theme park is just the expected cost of entry to enjoy the roller coasters.
Exactly. And millions of everyday investors try to get the massive returns of the stock market without paying the admission fee. They try to steal the returns by dodging the volatility. They try to sell all their stocks right before a crash, and they try to buy back in right at the bottom.
Which never works out.
But just like the car thief, trying to avoid the required price usually ends in severe punishment. You end up selling at the bottom in a panic and buying back in at the top when things look safe again. You have to convince yourself that the nausea of a market drop isn't a fine for being stupid. It's simply the admission fee required to participate in the greatest wealth-building machine in human history.
But paying that fee is incredibly difficult because pessimism is just so utterly seductive. I've always wondered about this dynamic. If an analyst goes on television and confidently declares the market is going to crash next week, a depression is imminent, everyone stops what they're doing, listens intently, and treats that person like a brilliant visionary.
Oh, yeah.
But if a different analyst goes on TV and says things will probably just keep getting slightly better over the next decade, they're instantly dismissed as a naive, clueless salesman. Why does pessimism sound so much smarter than optimism?
It sounds smarter because it is deeply rooted in our evolutionary biology. Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist, pointed out a fundamental truth about survival. Organisms that treat threats as more urgent than opportunities have a significantly better chance to survive and reproduce.
That makes sense.
If you are walking through the jungle and you miss out on a good opportunity for a meal, you are just hungry for a few hours. But if you ignore the rustling in the bushes that might be a lion, you are dead. It's game over. Our brains are hardwired to prioritize bad news because focusing on threats kept our ancestors alive.
And in our modern world, this biological hardwiring completely distorts how we perceive the news and the economy. Destruction is rapid, visceral, and highly visible. But growth is slow, quiet, and largely invisible.
We just don't notice it.
There's a brilliant example of this contrast in the research regarding health. Look at the decline in heart disease. Over the last 50 years, the age-adjusted death rate from heart disease has dropped by over 70%. That represents millions and millions of lives saved. It is the mathematical equivalent of saving the entire population of a major city like Atlanta every single year.
But you will never, ever see a front-page headline that reads, 1,000 people didn't die of heart disease today.
No, never.
Because compounding progress takes immense amounts of time. It happens quietly in the background in thousands of labs and clinics over decades. But destruction, a terrorist attack, an airplane crash, a sudden violent stock market collapse happens in a matter of seconds. Destruction provides fresh, terrifying, highly visual narratives that perfectly hack our evolutionary attention systems.
So when the market gets rocky and the news is screaming about the end of the financial world, we are biologically primed to panic. And when the stakes are that high and our fear is that elevated, we become incredibly susceptible to what we can only call financial quackery.
Oh, absolutely.
And there is a deeply tragic, fascinating story about a father in Yemen named Ali Hajaji that perfectly captures why we fall for this.
Yes, Hajaji's young son was deathly ill with a severe stomach virus. They lived in a deeply impoverished rural village with absolutely no access to modern medicine or doctors. In desperation, the local elders told Hajaji that the only way to cure his son was to take the tip of a burning stick and shove it through the boy's chest to literally drain the sickness out of his body.
Which is just horrific, agonizing, and completely devoid of any medical science.
But after he performed this desperate act, Hajaji told a reporter from the New York Times a sentence that explains so much of human behavior. He said, "When you have no money and your son is sick, you'll believe anything."
You believe anything.
When you combine a total lack of control with incredibly high stakes, human beings will eagerly believe appealing fictions. In personal finance, the stakes are massive. It is your life savings, your retirement, your family's baseline security. When the market is crashing and you feel entirely out of control, you will absolutely believe the TV pundit who confidently promises that he has a proprietary algorithm that can predict the exact bottom of the market.
You're just desperate for a burning stick.
You will pay exorbitant fees to a manager who promises guaranteed returns. We desperately want finance to operate like physics, where a NASA engineer can mathematically calculate the exact trajectory of a probe to Pluto. But finance is not physics. Finance is driven by the messy, unpredictable emotions of millions of individual human beings.
So how do we actually protect ourselves from this? If we know we are biologically wired for pessimism and we know we are susceptible to quackery when we panic, how do we inoculate our portfolios and our psychology against it?
The only reliable inoculation is establishing a true margin of safety, or what we might call room for error. You have to embrace what Nassim Taleb calls a barbell strategy. You want to be utterly terrified and hyper-conservative with one distinct part of your financial life. This means holding substantial cash reserves, maintaining a high savings rate, and rigidly living below your means. That conservative, boring foundation is the anchor.
Okay, so that's one side of the barbell.
Right. And because that anchor exists, it is what allows you to take risks and endure the wild, terrifying volatility with the other part of your portfolio, like your long-term stock investments. The conservative cash is what guarantees you can stay in the game, completely unbothered, long enough for the exponential compounding to finally work its magic.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, listening to this deep dive right now? It is time to synthesize these soft skills. We started this hour trying to figure out how Ronald Reed, a janitor sweeping floors in rural Vermont, could utterly destroy the financial returns of Richard Fuscone, a Harvard-educated executive with access to the best financial data on Earth.
And the definitive answer is not that Ronald Reed was a secret mathematical genius who discovered a flawless trading algorithm. The answer is that long-term wealth building is a soft skill. It is about emotional regulation. It is about clearly identifying the specific personal game you are actually playing
Mhm.
and having the discipline to ignore the loud, distracting noise of day traders and television pundits who are playing a completely different game.
It is about prioritizing flexibility and true control over your daily time, rather than sacrificing that time to buy depreciating luxury status symbols just to impress strangers at a stoplight, strangers who are only looking at the car anyway.
It is about the profoundly simple habit of recognizing that you do not need a specific spreadsheet-approved reason to save money. Saving is simply the gap between your ego and your income, and unearmarked savings buys you the most valuable, intangible asset in the world: options.
It is about accepting of the gut-wrenching volatility and fear are the required admission fees for long-term exponential growth, not punitive fines for making a mistake. You have to leave room for error in every plan because you are not an unemotional machine. You are a biological creature who will inevitably change your mind, your goals, and your desires over the next 20 years.
And ultimately, it is about realizing that true wealth is what you do not see. It is the potential energy waiting to be deployed on your own terms.
Which leads me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. We've talked extensively today about how true wealth is the unspent asset, the invisible potential energy. And we've established that the ultimate dividend of money is achieving independence from what other people expect of you.
If wealth is truly what you do not see, then perhaps the ultimate flex of financial success in the modern world isn't just about the luxury car you drive, or the massive house you live in, or the limited edition watch you wear.
Right. Maybe it goes even deeper than physical objects. Think about the hyper-connected digital world we live in right now. We are constantly, relentlessly pressured to curate our success on social media, to build a public personal brand that aggressively shouts, "Look at me, I'm winning."
Yeah, constantly signaling.
But if true wealth is genuinely invisible, and true independence is genuinely not caring what society thinks, then maybe the ultimate final sign of profound wealth today is the complete and total absence of a digital footprint trying to prove your success to others.
That is a fascinating conclusion. If your wealth is completely invisible, both physically in the driveway and digitally on the timeline, you are finally playing a game where you are the only judge who matters. You have successfully opted out of the casino entirely.
And when you opt out of that casino, the murky, muddy waters of financial decision-making suddenly start to clear up. You realize you don't need the flawless precision of an engineering schematic to build a good life, because you aren't trying to engineer a mathematically perfect, maximally optimized existence. You are just trying to build a reasonably resilient one.
A life where you can endure the inevitable fevers, sleep soundly through the market crashes, and let the quiet math of compounding do the heavy lifting in the background for decades.
Just like Ronald Reed, chopping firewood in the Vermont snow, completely unbothered by the daily chaos of Wall Street. So, to you listening, respect the inherent messiness of your own life, keep your internal goalposts firmly fixed in place, and whatever financial plan you decide to implement today, make sure it's one that lets you sleep well tonight. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the psychology of money.